is a new series of the Light On Leeds podcast where I shed the light wider and look at brilliant things people are doing elsewhere. My first guest in this series of Light On is Jane Badrock, an author. Have a listen. On this new series of Light On Leeds called Light On, it's where I shed the light a little bit wider and look at things that are going on beyond Leeds and the brilliant things people are doing. So my first guest in this series is Jane Badrock, who's an author. Hello, Jane.
Hello.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for coming along.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Jane, an author, have you always been a writer?
Oh, God, no. It's relatively recent. I think as a kid, I was always writing stuff. The trouble was I was one of those kids who was quite good at lots of things, but not brilliant at anything. So I just did all sorts of things. But writing was not a real priority for me, not until I was much, much older.
Did something give you the space to do more writing, or how did you fall into it later on?
What happened was, it's quite interesting really, because with all these terrible things going on with A-levels, I was another person who flunked my maths A-level. I was all set to go to university to do a maths degree, and I got this awful result, which wasn't even an O-level pass. I mean, I'd taken the O-level early, got a good grade, taken the additional O-level, got a good grade, did the mock and got 86%. It's still imprinted on my brain. And then when I got my A-level results, I didn't even get a low-level pass. I'd failed. So I can understand how all these poor kids are feeling, because I went through all of that. And it was life-changing, because I couldn't do a maths degree without maths A-level. Anyway, in the meantime, I met my husband-to-be, who was a fledgling accountant, and he said to me, well, whatever you do, don't become an accountant. Women aren't very good at that.
What?
So I thought, sod you, it. Exactly. And you could, in those days, you could be an accountant without doing a degree. I did actually sit my maths A-level a year later without even going into, well, I went to class once, and the lecturer was so sarcastic. Hello, Miss Badrock, he said. So you've come to see us at last. How nice. So I didn't go back. Anyway, took it a year later, got a D, but, hadn't even opened a book. So I was pretty sure that they'd mucked up my results. The problem was I was a little bit naughty at college, and they were going to throw me out for non-attendance. So I think that's probably why they didn't support an appeal. Anyway,
awful.
To move on, it was possibly deserved, I don't know. But I went on, became an accountant, qualified as an accountant, and in my very first job, I was only 19, and I was writing quite important letters. So I think that's when I started to use my writing skills. And I remember doing quite a complicated appeal to a government organisation, and they eventually gave in and paid up and complimented me on my letter writing.
Oh, that's excellent.
And then throughout my career, I found I was doing quite a lot of report writing and letter writing. And at one point, I was writing responses from the chief executive of a big national charity, and he would just sign my letters because he thought they were so good. I'm not singing my own praises, but I think I became quite good at writing and writing quite clearly. So I think writing was always there in the background.
And that must have given you some confidence as well.
Well, it's strange because as soon as you start writing creatively, everything changes because there are rules, systems and conventions that you don't really know anything about. Because when you're writing something factual, you've got to be factual.
Yeah.
But when you've been creative, it's different. So what happened is, I go to leap now to the house where I am now, and I was effectively sort of isolated with nothing but trees to talk to. And that's when I got onto Twitter. And I love Twitter because it was company, whereas, trees don't talk back to you very often, or they do stab you in the eye from time to time. From Twitter, I then got on to Google+, which of course is where we met.
It is.
And I started to write lots of very silly short things, because Twitter, you only have 28 characters or whatever it was. No, not 28 characters, but yeah, a limit. Whereas Google+, you could actually write lots more. And I generally got quite good feedback from some of the rubbish that I was writing. And that's really what sort of triggered the whole writing thing. I don't know if you remember any of those original writings from years ago.
I do remember a lot of the stuff that you wrote. I think it's what attracted to me, and just the way you wrote your posts in general, when you were telling stories of, dare I say, the rabbits, for example.
Well, that that's one of the things about country life, because if you're living in a normal suburban place, rabbits are nice little furry things that stick in cages and they're pets, and you play with them. But when you're in the countryside and they literally ravage everything, you have just spent hours planting thousands of hedge plants and they're eaten to the core, and they're digging burrows in fields where you put horses. If a horse puts its foot down a rabbit hole and breaks its leg, that's the horse gone.
Yeah, of course.
So what do? You have to control the rabbits somehow. Now, I shall pass over that, because now we're in a wonderful stage where we've got new foxes and they're working really well, and the rabbit population is now being perfectly controlled by nature. So they are not a problem.
That's a good place to
be.
be.
The deer also, yeah. So the deer, they're horrible little muntjacs. They're quite ugly little buggers. If you've ever seen any, they're quite squat and not very nice. But now the hedges are grown a little bit taller than the muntjacs. They can't do the damage that they were doing. So I'm more at peace with nature now. But for a while, it was, touch and go. But I went onto Facebook and I wasn't comfortable because I've got a lot of relatives, and they hopefully they won't listen to this. They might do, they probably won't. And I didn't really want to share things with the relatives particularly. However, I gradually made connections again and made remade friends of people that I'd known on Google+. And I also met some people. I went on a screenwriting course where I met a director, and he happened to post about a new book, a horror book that was being produced called Twisted 50. They'd already done volume 1, and I was too late to do that, but they were going to do volume 2. And even though as a kid I was a massive horror fan, I saw every horror film ever going, and I read all the pan books of horror stories. I've still got them in my lot. I'd never ever written a horror story. So I thought, I can do that. I can write a horror story. And it was like the floodgates were unleashed. And I was writing a horror story almost every day. If I had a problem with the bindweed in the garden, I'd write a horror story about plants. If I lost my rings, I'd write a horror story about someone that lost their rings. And literally, every day provided new inspiration. And I wrote, in the end, 21 short stories. And amazingly, 6 were shortlisted. And 1 finally was selected for publication. And it's only 1 author on story, so that was great. And I thought, my God, I finally got something published, which is something I know both my parents tried to do and never got anywhere. So that was a huge incentive. And then I'd already started writing novels by then, and so I started to push those. So that's how it all started.
And what's the book that you've just recently released?
That one, it's Sinister Sisterhood. It did actually come from a Google+ story. I don't know whether you'd remember it, but I'd started to write silly little stories about people on Google+. And then I moved a little bit away from people on Google+, and I wrote a very short story called Beryl the Badass Bookkeeper. And when I'd written her, I thought I could do more of these. And then I thought, how about Chloe the Cleaner? And it was about that time that Cecil the Lion was shot. Do you remember that awful story?
I do remember that awful thing.
The dentist that shot the lion with the black mane. And this was 2015. And I got so incensed, like many people, about that story. I thought, well, let's give these women a purpose. Rather than just have them being, out for their own gain to make lots of money, let's get back at some of these blasted trophy hunters. And so the story built and expanded all around the theme of animal activism. And it was quite enlightening. I wanted to make it funny because if you read the stories about trophy hunters and animal cruelty in general, it's awful. So I wanted to do something that was quite humorous so people could laugh without being horrified, but also get the point across.
Yeah.
And so Sinister Sisterhood was born. It was, a whole team of women. And I thought, well, hang on, would women work in a team? And I thought, probably not. Because they've all got their own agendas and they've all got their own. So it's not a coherent group. It ends up being quite successful, but there's a lot of angst and argument along the way, really. And I don't want to say too much more about it because hopefully lots of people will read it.
Yeah, I'll definitely put a link in the podcast notes that people can click through and buy it. I'm really looking forward to reading it myself. I've been lucky enough to have had the chance to read through some of the things that you're writing, and I always really look forward to that.
That's very nice to hear. I tell you what, now I'm a writer out in the big bad world. It is a big bad world. People are full of angst. It is very hard. You're only as good as your last review. And people will often say they love your writing, but they don't leave reviews. And it's not happened to me, but I've seen it happen to other people. There's always some moron that leaves someone a really horrible review. What's the point? If you read a book and you don't enjoy it, move on.
Yeah, I agree. It's exactly the same with social media, isn't it?
Yeah, I've probably been more full of angst since I've started writing than ever before in my life. No, I mean, that's an exaggeration because I've had some terrible things happen over the years. But it is quite a nail-biting experience, really. And
yes, so on the one hand you get to do something that you love and you're successful at it, but on the other hand it brings its whole other set of problems with it.
Oh, totally. I mean, today, for instance, I was reviving a story I wrote because I used to write some of my stories online, a chapter a day. There's a thing called NaNoWriMo. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's National Novel Writing Month. Well, what you do, you have to write a 50,000 word novel in November. So I did it in July and other months as well, but I did it in November too. The problem is I've now written so many novels. What I haven't done is, do you know the phrase dedupe? When you have to take out...
To dupe?
Basically, I have common names, and so everyone's called Smythe for some reason, or David. And now I've got to make sure that if I write a novel, I don't use a name that I've already used before. So that's a complication.
Is that quite a common thing that happens to people?
I don't know. I have asked other writers, and some say that they just keep a master spreadsheet. But I guess it is. The trouble is, if you write a novel, in theory, you should only have sort of half a dozen main characters. But you have all these side characters that you add in. You have to give them some name. And I had so many Davids and Michaels, and I thought, no, I can't keep using that. And today I realised I had another Sandra from a story I wrote.
An extra Sandra.
An extra Sandra, yeah. I don't think I've got any Hazels, actually.
Oh.
So I shall have to rectify that, won't I?
That's a pop up somewhere.
And the other thing is dates. Dates are phenomenally important. Probably no one checks, but there's always that one person that will say, 13th of November wasn't a Friday in that year. Do you know what I mean? And you have to be so careful that you're getting things right. And when you write, for instance, Sinister Sisterhood, it spans years. Decades, and I try to keep it as loose as possible. But when I've written crime stories, you actually need to be quite tight into a timetable, and then you need to think about things like, when was Easter?
Yeah.
Because Easter moves every year. And when was the weekend?
Gosh.
What was happening? Was there a major event happening on this day or near this day that you should reference? Do you see what I mean? So
yeah, I do.
The effort that goes into producing something, unless you're writing something dystopian or futuristic, when you don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah.
Anything you're writing that's meant to be grounded in today becomes an absolute nightmare of potential traps where you could get caught out. And believe me, there is always someone who spots these things, because I've seen them in other people's reviews. No one's picked me up for anything yet, but I haven't had enough reviews for that.
Especially, I imagine, like you say, with the crime writing, because people are sort of paying extra attention because they're looking for clues and things. So, yeah, I can imagine that is difficult. Do you find that you spend as much time on sort of fleshing out the story as you do on that kind of thing?
Oh, far more on that kind of thing. I mean, I'm writing a sequel to Sinister Sisterhood, and people will hopefully read it if hopefully it's published. And virtually every single sentence I've had to verify against something or look something up. So it's been very painstaking, and that won't come across in the reading of it, but I know that I've checked things. So, for instance, if I'm in New Delhi and there's terrible pollution in a part of the river, I have tried to work out exactly where that part of the river is to make sure it's flowing in the right direction from the hotel in which it emanated. Do you know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's a lot of detail.
It can get incredibly complicated, and I don't think people, when they read a book, really appreciate how much goes into it, and also how easy it is to slip up, to get a season wrong, to have somebody being, wearing a warm coat when actually it's summer and it was the hottest day of the year or something, Yeah. It's actually quite tricky.
It must be quite tiring.
Yeah, it is, because the term that people use for the first draft of a book, which is quite appropriate, it's called a vomit draft. Because you literally sit there and you just spew it out. And it's wonderful, especially if you're in the zone and you're writing. And this is what I was doing with probably all of my books when I did them for the NaNoWriMo thing, trying to do it in a month. And it's exhilarating. And then when you go back and you see what you've written, and the best thing is to leave, at least a few weeks before you go back to it. Even though, in many cases people were really enjoying what I was writing at the time, I suppose they were in the zone with me and they weren't being critical of it. But when you go back and think, oh my God, how many times did I say that? Why have I used that phrase? And the hard work is in the rewriting. I think there is a famous quote, and it's probably like Mark Twain or someone, is the first draft is you telling yourself the story, and then you really have to go through it to get the story right. And what's fascinating for me, because I'm going back to a lot of the stuff I wrote originally on Google Plus, is seeing how awful it was, and also recognising how much better I've got. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a particularly good writer now, but I can see how much I've come along, which is quite gratifying.
Yeah, it's great to have that record to look back on, isn't it?
Yeah. Occasionally I've given feedback to very new writers, and I feel their pain. I can see what they've done, and I know what stage they're at, and I know that it will get better for them. But some people can't cope with getting that feedback because they think they've written the most wonderful thing ever, and they haven't, because almost nobody does. I shouldn't think there's a writer alive that's ever written something brilliant the first time round. I mean, there may be a few, but there'll be very, very few and far between. It's something that you learn from reading other people's work, reading your own, and from understanding, what makes people enjoy your books, what makes them tick. So it's a very hard thing to do.
Well, it's a craft, isn't it? I suppose it's the same as any craft, that you have to keep working at it, and you can't get disheartened. And I can imagine that, it can be difficult receiving feedback. But like you say, it's like that kind of pain that you have to take because it's going to make things better in the future.
Yeah, but critical feedback is actually incredibly helpful. I can give you an example I had very recently. I've written a psychological thriller called The Ice Maiden, which I'm hoping will be published. But the central character is a girl approaching her 21st birthday. And somebody said to me as feedback, it's great that you've got into the body of a 21-year-old to write this. Well, clearly I'm not 21. And I thought, well, how I got into the mind of a 21-year-old. And luckily, amazingly, I found a 21-year-old reader who wanted to read book as a beta reader. And she gave me some quite fierce feedback, but it was absolutely what I wanted to hear, or I needed to hear, because she was being critical of some of the things that I'd said. And we all live in our era. So I'm sure there are things that my parents would have said that I said, Mum, Dad, you can't say things like that these days. And now she was saying it to me.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fascinating. But I didn't think, oh my God, she's being horrible. I thought, this is brilliant. And I actually named a character in the book after her now. And I've told her what fantastic feedback she gave me.
Oh, that's brilliant. That really is great.
It is, because I'll give you an example, a non-controversial one. She didn't recognise the word dim. She did not. She had to Google that.
What, dim as in stupid?
Yeah. She didn't know that word. So if I've got a 21-year-old or 20-year-old talking, saying someone's dim, and 21-year-olds don't know that or wouldn't use that term, that's wrong. It doesn't matter that my readership is probably much older. I've got to make my character as authentic as I possibly can.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So has that made you sort of think about in the future, if you're trying to get into the mind of somebody that you're not their age or perhaps even their gender, that you would actively seek feedback from someone in that group?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because the story I'm revising now has an autistic character in it. Now, at the time, I was quite aware that one of my readers is borderline autistic, and I know she verified what I was saying, which was really good. And I've seen something very recently that talks about how autistic people are regarded as being sort of aggressive and off the scale, all the rest of it, when actually they're probably normally quite scared and stressed all the time. So I'm very, very conscious of that, and I'm keeping to that very carefully, because I know that if I got it right the first time, I can't change that now. That's something I've got to keep right. So yes, I think you do become very conscious. The other thing that is I come across, which threw me completely, one of my crime stories, Three Little Girls, you might recognise the name. It starts with...
I do recognise the name.
It starts with a copper who is investigating cold cases in her holiday. And I had a reader, a beta reader, who could not accept that a police sergeant could investigate cold cases in her holiday. She said, no, she's got to be at least an inspector and she's got to have a team of people. Now, I don't think that's true. I've certainly spoken to lots of people who say, no, everybody picks at cold cases. But in her head, she obviously read something that said that, only inspectors can investigate cold cases. And so she wouldn't read anymore, even though she said she was really enjoying it. But someone else read it and said they loved every minute. So what do I do? Do I go back to her and say, you're wrong? No, of course not. You can't say that. That's in her head. She's going to stick with that. You just have to live with the fact that some people, for whatever reason, are never going to accept what you write. And you just move on.
Yeah, because I suppose it's going to be all of those readers that you never get to have any contact with. And you don't know how they've reacted to certain things or things that you worry about they absolutely love. So yeah, I suppose you just got to take the rough with the smooth, really, haven't you?
Yeah, everybody gets criticised for things. I think one of the worst things I've seen, particularly on Amazon, is sometimes people can't download a book properly. And so they give the author a 1-star review because it didn't download properly. And they don't understand that...
Oh, no.
Yeah, they don't understand that affects that author's ratings. And it's not fair. It's not the author's fault that the book didn't download. And occasionally I've seen...
Oh, that must be so frustrating.
Oh, incredibly frustrating. Occasionally I've seen 1-star reviews which are just simply vitriolic. They've even admitted they can't stand the author. And as an author, you just have to sit back and take it. Now, thankfully, that hasn't happened to me yet. I'm sure the time will come and I'm absolutely dreading it. So you have to harden up and expect all sorts of things.
And so do you just plan, have you got lots of ideas in your head all the time, Jane, that you're thinking of ways that you can sort of what format you'll do them in and whether you'll actually write them down? Have you always got things bubbling up?
All the time. I probably don't wish I did write them down because I'd have far too many. I get inspired incredibly easily. So, for instance, one psychological thriller I've written was inspired by finding a block of stones in my back garden. I posted it on Facebook, as it was then, and someone said, oh, a friend of mine found something like that, and there was a dog's body underneath it. Whoosh! 80,000 word story. When I was driving into Harlow, I think, somebody cut me up and then cut up the car in front. And I thought, if only I could get my camera out and take a picture. But then if I did that, knowing me, I'd crash and I'd probably end up in a coma. And then what's the worst thing that can happen to you when you're in a coma? And you read Comatose, I think. That's what
I did.
That's where it came from. So anything.
Oh my gosh.
Anything starts me off. So at the moment, what I'm doing is quite rigidly going through all my back catalogue, if you like, and trying to bring it up to date, make it more readable, getting improving my style, and then hopefully I will get more books published. I mean, I've got lots coming through.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to reading them.
I have started some new ones too, which I don't even want to talk about. Somebody very recently messaged me, and I said, oh, I've got 4 in the front, 5 in the back. It's actually 7 in the back. I've got 7 stories that are still fledgling stories, and some of them I think could be really successful. But have to take them one at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jen, I'm going to let you go because I happen to know that you've got a very important appointment in 15 minutes, which apparently you cannot miss.
I cannot, no. Coronation Street.
So do you want to...
I tell you what.
Coronation Street.
You don't watch it, do you?
I don't watch it.
The writing is superb. It's seriously one of the best series for writing. The way they spin out their stories, and some of the storylines go on for years, and their characters are just so beautifully written and rounded. It's a masterclass in writing. I would be perfectly happy if anyone thought anything in mine was remotely similar to a scene in Coronation Street, because they are absolutely superb. Did you know Sir Ian McKellen was in one once?
I did know that. I did know he was in it, yeah.
And I went to see him on stage last year, it was before lockdown, and he regards that as one of his finest achievements. It was wonderful because he was up against Ken Barlow, and you don't know who Ken Barlow is, but Ken Barlow is, again, a fantastically rounded character.
I do know how Ken Barlow is.
Yeah, he's a real snob, and he has his pinch points where suddenly he'll let loose, but it was just beautifully played. Beautifully played.
Is that not something you'd fancy looking into to see if you could do some writing for Coronation Street?
No, I'm a commitment freak. I don't want to do something that I have to do every day. I'd rather have my choice. But I have written a script which I've sent to Sir Ian McKellen, and he very kindly sent it back to me. And I don't think he read it, but it was very nice to get a letter back from him saying that I'm not sure I should quote him, but he said basically at his age he needed something to be fully funded and ready to go before he could consider it, which I think is probably a fair point.
Oh,
but it's very nice.
Well, at least that's
Oh yeah,
that's more like an arrangement thing. It's, at least it wasn't that he didn't like your work.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, it was lovely. So I've now had a correspondent. I've got a signed letter from him, which is very, very nice, and I shall treasure that.
It's been so lovely speaking to you. Thank you so much for coming along and being the first person on this new series.
Oh, thank you very much. No, I've enjoyed it. The wine helped, as you can probably tell.
And I'll be seeing you around anyway, obviously, on all the social media, but as well, I'll put links in the podcast notes so that people can click straight through and buy your amazing work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Light on, a journey of discovery through Bristol, Hull and Coventry. What's cool in Liverpool, you'll see scintillating cities and stunning countryside.
It was great for me to chat to Jane in real life after knowing her online for many, many years. There are links in the podcast notes for you to click through and buy her work. Jane would have liked me to play an Alice Cooper track, but unfortunately I don't have his email to ask his permission, so instead she chose the raucous song Settlers Street, sent to me by Adam and Elvis. Have a listen.